The best graphics cards are the beating heart of any gaming PC, and everything else comes second. Without a powerful GPU pushing pixels, even the fastest CPU won't manage much. While no one graphics card will be right for everyone, we'll provide options for every budget and mindset below. Whether you're after the fastest graphics card, the best value, or the best card at a given price, we've got you covered. Number 1. GeForce RTX 3080. NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 3080 with the current NVIDIA Ampere architecture continues to occupy our top recommendation. However, we want to be clear that this now applies to all RTX 3080 cards, including the RTX 3080 Ti and RTX 3080 12GB depending on current prices. Right now, the best deals we can find are $740 for the 10GB card, $760 for the 12GB model, or $800 for the 3080 Ti. If you're serious about maxing out all the graphic settings and you want to play at 4K or 1440p, this is the card to get. It's more than you'll generally need for 1080p gaming, unless you're running the latest ray tracing games, in which case DLSS support should also help performance. DLSS also works without ray tracing, and is currently available in over 200 games, so it's definitely a feature that's worth a bit extra. AMD offers the Universal FSR 2.0 as an alternative to DLSS, but it's not in nearly as many games. Intel's SS meanwhile sounds a lot like DLSS, only for Intel GPU, which we're still waiting on outside of the entry-level RK 380. Number 2. Radeon RX 6800 XT. AMD Navi 21 GPU like the Radeon RX 6800 XT represent the best cards for Team Red. The RX 6800 XT provides a massive boost in performance and features relative to the previous generation RX 5700 XT, as well as adding ray tracing support via DirectX ray tracing or Vulkan RT thanks to the RDNA 2 architecture. At current prices, which have dropped quite a bit in the past few months, the RX Radeon 6900 XT and RX 6800 are also worth a look. The 6900 XT, for example, now costs 17% more for about 5% higher performance, while the RX 6800 drops performance by 7% and also costs 7% less. The Navi 21 GPU was affectionately dubbed Big Navi prior to launch by the enthusiast community, and we got exactly what we wanted. It's over twice the size of the previous generation Navi 10, with twice the shader cores and twice the RAM. Clock speeds are also boosted into the 2.1–2.4 GHz range, depending on the card model, and AMD did all this without substantially increasing power requirements. The RX 6800 XT has a 300 WTBP, slightly lower than the RTX 3080's 320 WTBP. A big part of AMD performance comes thanks to the massive 128 MB Infinity Cache. It improves the effective bandwidth by 119%, according to AMD. Few if any games need more than 16 GB, so the 6800 XT is in a great position in that area. Number 3. GeForce RTX 3090 Ti. For some, the best graphics card is the fastest card. Pricing be damned. NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 3090 Ti caters to this category of user. At more than double the official starting price of the RTX 3080, performance is only moderately better, 20–30% in most workloads. It's also only 5–10% faster than the previous RTX 3090, with an even higher MSRP. But online prices are plummeting from the official MSRP, and the RTX 3090 Ti can now be found for as little as $1,100. Opens in new tab. That's because even though the RTX 3090 Ti currently reigns as NVIDIA's top GPU, the next generation NVIDIA Ada Lovelace GPU aren't too far away, and NVIDIA and its partners are busy trying to clear out old RTX 30 series inventory. If you simply must have the fastest graphics card available, especially for 4K gaming, the RTX 3090 Ti fits the bill until October most likely, at which point there will be a new king of the hill. The RTX 3090 Ti has uses outside of gaming, and NVLink support means you can pair two cards for professional apps and GPU compute workloads. The 24 GB of GDDR6X memory is also helpful in a variety of content creation applications. Blender, for example, frequently showed 35% higher performance compared to the 3080, and over twice the performance of the Titan RTX. Just watch out for lower than expected performance in some of the SBC ViewPerf apps, where the Titan RTX has additional features turned on in its drivers that aren't enabled for GeForce cards. You'll need the even more expensive NVIDIA RTX A6000 for the full professional driver suite. Number 4. Radeon RX 6700 XT. Start with the Navi 21 GPU and then cut down the various functional units to create a smaller die that can sell at lower prices, and you have AMD Navi 22 and the RX 6700 XT. The RX 6750 XT is basically the same GPU, with a slight boost to clock speeds, memory speeds, and power consumption about 5% faster overall, but with a 12% price hike. The 6700 XT has the same number of GPU cores as the previous generation RX 5700 XT, but significantly higher clock speeds and more cache give it about a 25% boost to performance at higher settings and resolutions, at least. During testing, the RX 6700 XT had clock speeds in excess of 2.5 GHz while gaming, and that's at stock on the reference card. Factory overclock models can push that closer to 2.7 GHz, still without cooking the GPU. In our performance testing, the RX 6700 XT traded blows with the RTX 3070 and RTX 3060 Ti. It's a bit faster than the latter, and a bit slower than the former, but the going price of around $420 lands below both of those. Still, if we include pretty much any games with DLSS or ray tracing, the 6700 XT comes in behind the 3060 Ti and almost looks like a 3060 competitor. Number 5. GeForce RTX 306. As we approach the lowest end of the price and performance ladder with NVIDIA's desktop Ampere lineup, the cuts to processing power become more significant. The RTX 3060 uses NVIDIA's GA106 GPU, with a 192-bit memory interface and 12GB VRAM. That's quite a bit better than the RTX 3050, but still a big step down from the GA104 chip used in RTX 3060 Ti, which has 36% more GPU cores. Overall performance is similar to the RTX 2070, so 2.5 years later, you can now match a $500 graphics card with a $330 alternative, except the RTX 3060 still tends to sell for closer to $400. At least the RTX 3060 delivers a great overall value, factoring in ray tracing and DLSS performance. VRAM capacity isn't a problem, and there are a few instances where the 3060 starts to close the gap with the 3060 Ti. It never quite gets there, however, and the 3060 Ti may be the better choice if you can find one at a reasonable price. At present, it's an $80 jump to the 3060 Ti, making this or one of AMD offerings a better value. Discounting ray tracing and DLSS, in our testing the RTX 3060 ends up being roughly the same performance as AMD RX 5700 XT. 18 months later, that's not going to set the world on fire, but then that's typical of mainstream parts. With DXR and DLSS, however, the 3060 can even trade blows with AMD RX 6800. We'll likely see an RTX 4060 replacement sometime in 2023. Number 6. Radeon RX 6650 XT. AMD answer to the RTX 3060 comes via the Navi 23 architecture. Normally, we'd expect a 32 CU variant of Navi 22, dubbed the RX 6700 XT. But AMD trimmed CU counts, memory interface width, and infinity cache sizes to get a smaller and less expensive chip that still performs well. Note that the Radeon RX 6700 now exists, with 10GB of VRAM. Though it costs quite a bit more, performance ends up slightly above the previous gen RX 5700 XT, which is impressive considering the memory bus has been cut in half to just 128 bits. There's understandable concern with the 8GB of VRAM, however, and there are certainly cases where the RTX 3060 ends up as the better choice. Still, it's surprising how much even a 32MB infinity cache seems to boost performance. When you look at the memory bandwidth, this is basically a chip that's smaller than Navi 10, built on the same TSMC N7 node, and it delivers 10–15% better frame rates at 1080p. There are instances where it struggles, however, ray tracing being a big one. Several games that we tested with DXR, DirectX ray tracing support couldn't even do 20 FPS at 1080p. NVIDIA's RTX 3060 was about twice as fast, without using DLSS, and typically got an additional 40% faster with DLSS quality mode. FSR doesn't really fix that, either, since it provides a similar boost in performance to both AMD and NVIDIA and even Intel GPU, after delivering impressive amounts of VRAM on the other big Navi chips. The RX 6650 XT and RX 6600 XT feel like a letdown. Number 7. GeForce RTX 3060 Ti. When we tested the GeForce RTX 3060 Ti, we felt it might be the best of the bunch for NVIDIA's Ampere GPU. It has all the same features as the other 30 series GPU, with a starting price of just $399. In theory, of course, as it naturally sold out just as quickly as all the other new graphics cards. Things have improved, however, and the lowest price we can find right now is down to around $405, still more than MSRP. But getting closer. The 3060 Ti beat the previous Gen 2080 Super in our testing, winning in every game we ran. It was also only about 9% slower than the RTX 3070 but cost 20% less. If you're still sitting on an older GTX 1070 or RX Vega 56, the 3060 Ti is up to twice as fast, sometimes even more, in the latest games. The only real concern is the lack of VRAM. Of course, you can drop the texture quality a notch, and you might not even notice the difference, but deep down inside you'll feel regret. Not really high settings often look indistinguishable from ultra settings. Number 8. Radeon RX 6600. The Radeon RX 6600 takes everything good about the 6600 XT and then scales it back slightly. It's about 15% slower overall, just a bit behind the RTX 3060 as well, but in our testing it was still 30% faster than the RTX 3050. It's also priced to move, with the least expensive card starting at just $250 like this XFX RX 6600 card at Amazon. Opens in new TED. That's a lot less than AMD official $329 MSRP, which felt somewhat high at launch. Not that we ever saw those prices in meaningful quantities until recent months, but with cards shipping well below MSRP, this represents the market's best overall bang for the buck. Mid-range graphics cards are a competitive arena, and the RX 6600 goes up against both the RTX 3050 as well as previous generation RTX 20 series and GTX 16 series GPU. It ended up delivering your RTX 2070 performance in our testing, at least in non-ray tracing scenarios. With ray tracing enabled, however, it struggled badly, barely averaging 30 FPS in our DXR test suite at 1008 at medium and trailing NVIDIA's RTX 2060 by 20%. If you're not worried about ray tracing, the RX 6600 definitely warrants a look. AMD Infinity Cache does wonders for what otherwise looks like a somewhat underpowered GPU, and the card only needs about 130W, far less than competing GPU. Number 9. Radeon RX 6950 XT. The RX 6950 XT currently represents the ultimate performance from the Radeon Apple architecture, surpassing the old RX 6900 XT by about 9% on average. AMD set the MSRP at a rather high $1,099 at launch, but we're already seeing cards selling well below that mark. The RX 6950 and 6900 XT are basically the same GPU, but with faster 18GB GDDR6 on the 6950 along with a higher power limit and slightly higher GPU clocks. The RX 6950 XT boasts slightly more GPU cores than the RX 6800 XT, and combined with the difference in clock speeds, the 6950 XT is about 15% faster overall. In terms of standard gaming performance, the RX 6950 XT ranks as the fastest GPU around for 1008 and 1440 gaming, but it falls behind at 4K. The usual caveats about lower ray tracing performance and the lack of DLSS support apply as well, and while FSR 2.0 looks good, it's not widely supported by games yet. If you want the best DXR/RT experience right now, NVIDIA still wins, not that you need ray tracing to enjoy games. Number 10. GeForce RTX 3050. NVIDIA tried to create a budget RTX 30 series card with its GeForce RTX 3050, though the $250 recommended price still puts it firmly in the mainstream category. It's also selling at $300 or more right now, which is better than the launch prices but not as low as we'd like to see, considering it ended up being 7% slower than the previous generation RTX 2060 in our testing. In general, We'd rather pay for an RTX card than plunk down a similar amount of cash for GeForce GTX 1660 Super. Opens in new tab, or RX 5500 XT 8GB. Opens in new tab, though the former is now back in stock and going for closer to $200. See below for our next pick. In our testing, the RTX 3050 was about 15% faster than a GTX 1660 Super. Plus, it can legitimately run ray tracing games, and it also supports DLSS. That's more than we can say for AMD RX 6500 XT, which probably should have skipped RT support in exchange for more VRAM and bandwidth. The biggest problem is that $300 or more is still a lot to pay for mainstream levels of performance, and we should hopefully see prices drop down to MSRP in the coming months. For now, AMD offers a better option for those that don't care about ray tracing and DLSS, so this is strictly for people that prefer to stick with NVIDIA, even if the performance on tap isn't that compelling. Number 11. GeForce GTX 1660 Super. Getting down to a price point of $200 requires making some compromises, which in this case means dropping ray tracing and DLSS and opting for NVIDIA's previous generation GTX 1660 Super. This is still a great card, however, and for just $20 more than the current going price on the GTX 1650 Super, you get a 30% boost of performance. It's also much faster than the budget-friendly RX 6500 XT and similar cards, and it has 6GB of memory. If you can spend a bit more, moving up to the RTX 2060 for $230, opens a new tab makes sense. But once you start down that road, there's the RX 6600, RX 6650 XT, etc. At some point you have to draw a line and not go higher, and this is about as low as you can go on pricing without tanking performance. The GTX 1660 Super beats up on the RX 6500 XT, winning by over 30% in our 1008 testing. Even if RX 6500 XT can technically run DXR games, it's so slow that it's hardly worth the effort. NVIDIA's NVENC hardware also allows for live streaming and encoding your gameplay, which is another feature missing from AMD Navi 24 hardware. Number 12. Radeon RX 6500 XT. The budget realm of GPU often ends up going to older hardware, but the Radeon RX 6500 XT at least uses AMD Radeon A2 GPU, except the Navi 24 chips really got cut down on the chopping block, with only a 64-bit memory interface, 16MB Infinity Cache, an X4 PCIe link, no video encoding support, and only 2 display outputs. That's a lot of potentially interesting features that got hacked off. Still, if price is your driving concern, the RX 6500 XT starts at $176 on Amazon, opens a new tab, which makes it less expensive than most other options.